Haunted Bloodlines, the ghostly inheritance. Scary story. My grandmother was a wise woman because she knew too many stories, so the fact of visiting her implied listening to a recount of words and phrases that only that long-lived woman knew. It was then, when on a visit to the town where my grandmother was from, exactly in Zongolica, Veracruz, that woman began to tell those words that little by little became a very peculiar legend, because it was a story of one of the most famous gods, Tlaloc. That woman began to tell those words that little by little became a very peculiar legend, because it was a story of one of the best-known gods, Tlaloc, because in that reign was well known the mistreatment of dogs. It was there when different dogs could agree and were telling their concerns, so that this God will send that suffering to men, because these animals are friends of them. After having done an errand, they looked for a topple dog among them and told him that he would have to cross rivers, go up and down hills, cross forests, and defend himself. When they decided which dog would carry the errand, another concern arose. Where would he carry the message? If he carried it on his muzzle or in his hands, he would lose it when he tried to defend himself. Thinking about this problem, the older dog spoke up, for the grandmother commented that the message would be more safely carried on his tail. Once the way to send the message had been decided, they put it in his backside, and the dog jumped up and down to do his job. That story seemed completely absurd to me at the time, because that kind of old anecdotes in most cases were not real, because people had no other more important occupation than inventing them. Without further ado, I continued listening to that old woman, because at the end of the day, those words that came out of her mouth were still entertaining. As the woman continued with her story, she explained that many years have passed, and so far, the dog has not returned with the answer. That is why every time the dogs meet, they sniff each other's tails to see if it is not the one who brought the answer, or to punish him if he has not yet carried the message, or if he brings the answer and has not delivered it. Maybe that story left me a lot to think about, because that act that dogs often do is really true. To which an uncle quickly answered that the reality of it is that they are busy tracking the devil, because in the midst of uncertainty, those animals are punished for breaking some rules that have already been established for them. It was there when they dealt with the subject of the famous Nahuales, those beings that have the ability to transform into animals and hurt whoever is in their path. Because also, that legend was one of the favorites of the grandmother, because years ago when she was just a child, one of those demons took over the daughter of her neighbor, who at that time was a baby. It was there when the parents found her body dismembered all over the room, but when they wanted to do something, it was too late. That animal of unknown identity had taken over the organs of that innocent girl. It was precisely when the grandmother made her appearance, because she remembers those laments. However, when she saw such a beast, the only thing she did at that moment was to hide, because perhaps if that being had realized that the woman who was then a little girl was there watching him, he would have also acted against her, and at the same time even killed her. So since that time, that girl was dedicated in life to know more and more about those paranormal events that could occur around her. Over the years, she began to realize that in the world, there was a lot of evil that could easily take over those good and defenseless souls, which is why she always told us to stand firm in any situation, because clearly those demons realize when a soul is pure and full of peace. Such is the case of the story of her mother, because when she was pregnant, she tried to run away from her father, as he beat her strongly to the point of leaving her unconscious, an act that her mother could not stand anymore and fled the town, because at that time she was foul-mouthed, a woman who left her husband. It was then that she decided to hide several days in a hill on the outskirts of the place. However, she had to return. She always heard strange noises, presences which were notoriously evil. Even on one occasion she witnessed that woman who has been so well known throughout Mexico, better known as the Weeping Woman. It was then when she not only feared for her life, but also for her daughters, because that sinister and evil being could realize that she was about to give birth and thus be able to snatch the only good thing she had, her baby. When she returned dead of fear and uncertainty, everyone in the town branded her as crazy, because when she told that series of things that the poor woman lived, they decided that they had only been pretext to run away with another, because they did not believe in the abuse of her husband. Rather, they gave the place to the man, and she was threatened, because if she returned to touch topics of terror and spirits, there would be no turning back. This is how my grandmother, as she grew up and learned these anecdotes, reinforced her interest in the spirits. So on one occasion, she visited a witch doctor who told her that she had a gift and this should be taken advantage of, because it was not only the interest that knocked on the door of that long-lived woman, but also the ability to observe those souls and spirits that were near, as well as to recognize the souls of the people who lived mainly in the town. Grandma really had a gift, and although her passion was to tell those anecdotes, there were some that she never mentioned. But clearly in the village they were known, because most of them involved my grandmother, or at least there was an intervention of it. That was when I understood that as a child. I used to enjoy those stories, but as the years went by, and as I grew up, I could see that those topics were clearly delicate, and I should not take them so lightly, because clearly a paranormal event could happen to me someday, and it was there where I witnessed what would change my life completely. Just a few hours after being with Grandma, it was already dark. However, I had to leave the house, because the next day I had to go to work early, so it was difficult for me to stay and return the next day. So I took my bags and left in my car. However, halfway there, it began to fail, and for a moment, I almost lost control of the steering wheel. It was as if someone had taken control of it, and although I worried mainly about my car and those material things, I certainly did not know that the worst was what came after that. So I tried to call my car insurance. However, no one answered. I figured it was because of the late hours of the night, and that the best option was to ask for a tow truck and go back to Grandma's house to solve this matter the next day. When I got home, I noticed a very strange smell. It seemed that something was on fire, but more than that, it was a smell of incense. So I quickly went to the grandmother's room, and what a surprise I got, because when I looked at her carefully, I could see how she was doing a series of rituals. Legends, horror story. Without further ado, I was completely confused, because it was something that I did not expect, and less from my grandmother. She really had a gift that she still kept because she had a deal with those spirits that passed through there. It was when I understood and everything made sense, because that old woman began to have an infection known as vitiligo, because that disease connected both mind and body. So maybe in the middle of that stress, the grandmother had a problem, and it was not external, but internal, because those beings had a vibe so strong that this was transferred to the skin. Continuing with that strange event of the grandmother, she clearly tried to explain things to me, but I ran away very confused, but when I wanted to open the main door and go out through it, there was something that stopped me. It was a greater force which took hold of me. I had never felt so much fear, and instantly I knew that in that house there were a number of souls which were present in the ritual that minutes ago my long-lived was doing. So I could not do anything about it but lose consciousness, because my breathing began to become more and more agitated. I felt lost, and I swore that those souls took over me, and I would never be me again. Maybe at that moment I was exaggerating, but from the car I knew that things were going wrong, and clearly seeing the person I respected in all its splendor of the word. The only thing that caused in me at that moment was a terror, because that side I had never seen in her. It was as if she was a stranger to me, and I really could not realize the things that were happening at that moment. At that moment, I felt how a force pulled my sweatshirt. Also, my heart began to beat slowly. It was then when I stopped feeling my body, and I could perceive that trip that would change me completely. However, from one moment to another, I returned to my reality. And when I realized the grandmother was lying on the floor, I did not understand things. I was really confused. However, I understood that she had driven those spirits away from me, and as a result, no longer had vital signs. Grandma had lost her life, and I never knew if she had eternal rest and went to hell. Thank you for joining us for this spine-tingling story. We hope you found it both thrilling and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, please consider participating in our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with your friends. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more engaging content for you. Goodbye, and may you always tread carefully in the world of the unknown.